Hey everybody, Jay Schlansky here from the Fifth Trooper Network. I just want to take a moment to thank you for checking out this show. Did you know that over at thefifthtrooper.com we have tons of other content, including blogs, other podcasts, all kinds of stuff. In addition, if you want access to exclusive content, you can join us on patreon.com/thefifthtrooper and join at any level and you'll get access to exclusive blog articles, access to our private Discord, and much more. So please check us out, and thank you so much for all your support.
Welcome to the Notorious Scoundrels, a Star Wars Legion podcast bringing you the latest news, general perspective, and competitive discussion.
Hello and welcome back to the Notorious Scoundrels podcast. I'm Kyle. I'm here with Evan Paul. What's up?
Hey, I'm doing great. How are you?
Good. Mike is not with us this week. I'm sure he'll be back next week, but it's just you and me, Evan, this week. Just the blog editors here. We're gonna have our own.
Yeah, so we're gonna read the blog from A to Z.
Word for
every
word.
single article.
Yep.
You may have noticed this podcast is 48 hours long. So.
I think it would take longer than that, actually, if you went all the way back to 2018.
Oh yeah. Also like 95% of what we say is going to be completely irrelevant to the modern game. Just
yes. So if you want to go ahead and fast forward, we're not going to bookmark anything for you, but yeah, this will be like book on tape level of no. We're not going to do that. Don't worry. We are going to talk about an article on the blog today, though, because Evan just released one today that was very interesting and good for creating discussion. So we're going to talk about that in a little bit. However, we're not going to read it word for word for you. If you want to do that, you can check it out yourself and read it word for word at thefifthtrooper.com/blog. But we are going to talk about it. We're going to use it as kind of a launching point for broader discussion. But first, we have an actual news item related to Legion, and more specifically, a pre-order release announcement. So you can now order crab droids and aqua droids, which are both releasing on January 17th, 2025. Sadly, not in time for Christmas, unfortunately. But
it is too bad. But we know the deal by now is that they don't like to release new stuff right before holidays, because I guess then they don't need to. If they need to make an emergency reaction to get an assembly guide up on the website because it wasn't there, is that they can do that stuff outside of the holidays. So that's fine. There's still stuff to buy like Sleeper Cell, and I'm pretty sure that's the only thing that recently came out. So get some Sleeper Cells.
Riot Troopers, come on, Evan.
Oh, sorry about that. I forgot all about it.
I think most people did. Unfortunately. Sorry, Empire players. So let's talk real quick. I do want to kind of get your opinion on crab droids because we have talked about them previously on the podcast, but you're kind of a self-stylized, maybe support expert is the wrong word, certainly a speeder expert, but I haven't got your opinion yet on crab droids. So I think we should kind of go over what they do since we have a full reveal for crab droids, and then get your opinion on crab droids, and then we can move on to the very little that we know about aqua droids and speculate wildly, and then we'll get to our main topic. So crab droids, this is a separatist unit. The base unit is 70 points. They're very similar in many ways to spider droids. And so, we can sort of call out in some ways that they're different. But they're 70 points. They have a red save instead of a white save, and armor 2, but they only have 5 health instead of like 6 for the spider droid. They do have climbing vehicle. Of course, they're a crab. They also have that programmed slot, which saw some cost changes in the recent balance update. They have reposition, which makes them super maneuverable. They have scale, scout 1, and their most important keyword, in my opinion, scouting party 1.
Yep.
And then they've got 2 heavy, heavy's the wrong word, hardpoint upgrades. They're basically just 2 different varieties of like generic laser cannons. One of them has impact 3 on it, and one of them does not. And the one that doesn't is 5 points cheaper. The dice, one is 5 black, one is 2 red, 2 black. So like pretty similar in terms of your actual final output there. But yeah, thoughts on the crab droid?
Yeah, so obviously the star of the show is the scouting party. One of the things that I get into in the article we'll talk about in a second is how valuable Scout is. We've gone over this on the show before, so don't need to go over it again. But the for droids is that they're kind of funky in that they've actually been out of all the factions, even though they're the faction that has been doing probably the second best compared to Gar prior to the points change, is that they actually weirdly have the least amount of access to Scout generally. Is that like most of the time people in other factions have been using gear slots to put recon intel on. Obviously that's a little bit more expensive now, but for the droid players is that I think that those gear slots are basically, they're on the super tax, and I think the regular tactical droid, there's not much else that they're on, if anything. And those aren't the ones you would want to put it on anyway. So
Right.
the droids pretty much, I get into this in the article also, but like their access to sort of being able to get out there and start shooting is that it's basically either been BXs, which have a natural Scout 3, which is very nice,
Yeah.
or it's vehicles that have a big enough base that their standard move will get them into shooting range right off the bat, which means that they're not relying on a Scout move to get out there and start shooting. And I think obviously the snail is the best example, but the AAT and the spider droid can also just do a move and then start shooting on turn one. But the crab droid will enable other sys units that previously like haven't been able to have access to anything along those lines to suddenly have access to it. And I think that probably the two biggest examples that I can think of are either like running 3 of them and then giving a Scout 1 move to each of 3 B2 units. You could also do with Magnus. There's a lot of good choices, I think. Or the other thing is to give it to probably Dooku specifically is like the hero character that would make the most use of it. But Asajj would also make use of it, and Grievous would also make use of it. So it's neat that they have the ability to sort of spread the wealth there. And I guess the question is going to be is the chassis effective enough to make it worth spending? I think it ends up, if you run a protocol, I mean, because you have to run a protocol.
You have to run programming. Yeah.
Yeah. And then, yeah, go ahead.
The cheapest you can make it is 78 points.
Right. So that's with the non-impact gun and the engagement protocol. So that does make me think that it's probably usually going to be better to pay 5 more points for the better gun, just because even though the average dice are the same, is that A, you're going to have a higher top side, which may especially matter if you're going to choose to run attack protocol on them, and then B, it's got the impact 3, which will matter against a whole lot of lists out there. And so I think that it's one of those things that it's hard to sort of predict just by looking at the unit card about how worth it it's really going to be. It's definitely the sort of thing that I am planning on trying. Like I'm going to pick up 3 of them. They're actually, I'm going to pick up 2 of them. This is a bonus, is that each box comes with 2 minis, and it's a 1 mini unit. And so the different poses, and so it's actually like you get a lot of value out of each box. And so if you and a buddy, each want to have a full set, is that you could actually just get 3 boxes and then you'd be good.
It's like splitting a core set, except you're splitting a support box basically.
Yeah. So like props to AMG. I think that probably what happened is that they just decided that there were 2 sculpts that they like and they didn't want to choose between them, and then they just decided to go ahead and give you a 2-for-1, which is certainly nice. It's a game that's can be expensive enough as it is, obviously. So getting a little bit of a deal is pretty great. But yeah, I think my plan is going to be to just try out at least 3 with the defense protocols, and then have a super tac and a regular tactical droid to make tokens, or because like through exemplar and through strategize is that you should be able to give them dodge access, and then you're sort of like marching up behind them and hopefully using them as line of sight blockers, at least for the first couple turns.
Yep.
And then once they get there, is that their gun isn't amazing. It doesn't have as much topside as even like the Ion Spider, but it seems pretty consistent. And if you're doing offense protocols to keep them alive, then you'll still have like a regular use of an aim from the strategize at the very least. And so I could see it being very effective. And then I feel like you sort of flesh out the rest of the list with a combination of B2s and Magnas, and maybe 1B1 with a repair droid. They're not quite as spammable as they used to be, but
yeah,
if you have a bunch of like 2 health droid troopers that are going to be like your front force, then I still think that having 1 repair bot can be worth it. And then so your back line is the crabs, and then your front line is like your double B2 triple magna or whatever it is. And I feel like it's worth a shot. At least it's a lot of beef.
It is. And it's also worth mentioning that if you just want the scouting party, which it feels like maybe a little bit too much to just pay for that, but you don't actually have to buy a hardpoint upgrade with them. So you could field them with just engagement protocols and nothing else for 73 points. And their melee attack is actually not
quite
terrible.
good.
Yeah, it's 2 red, 1 black, 1 white with impact 2 and pierce 1. So that's like a decent melee attack. And because they are a vehicle, they'll move pretty fast. You know, they're basically as fast as an ATRT. And ATRTs end up in melee all the time. So
it's true.
You know, this is kind of like a droid ATRT, except of course it gives you scouting party, which previously was not a keyword that any like non-character unit had access to. It's just Wicked and Rex, and that's it. So
Yeah.
of course, in those cases, it's scouting party 2, and they both have ways to make it scout 2 instead of scout 1.
Yep.
So we'll see like how effective scouting party is when it is just scout 1 and not scout 2. But for a faction that had basically no access to scout previously except on BX droids, I think this is still a pretty big deal, especially as the chassis that you're putting this on seems like it's just reasonably good anyway, even without the scouting party. And they themselves, of course, have scout 1, so they're also scouting forward. You know, this is basically you take three crab droids and you've got 6 units with scout. So
yeah,
which is 6 more units than droids had access to previously.
Right.
So yeah, I think these guys will be a staple personally.
Yeah, I will say I was sad when because I looked up the rules of scouting party to make sure how it worked, and because for a second I was like, what if you could just like put scout 1 on Count Dooku 3 times and then just have him run out there? But that's not how it works. That you have to resolve them 1 at a time, basically. And so if somebody has scout, then you can no longer give them scouting party.
Right.
So you basically have to do 1 unit per crab droid. But really my only quibble with them is that like the 2 guns are remarkably alike.
And they're extremely similar. Yeah.
I feel like that cuts down on sort of like the diversity of play options a little bit. Is that, you know, you compare it to the spider droid situation to where they basically couldn't be further apart from each other.
Yep.
And ATRT is basically the same way. But I guess they didn't want to like make it too much like the spider droid. But I think it would have been cool if instead of if the cheaper gun was maybe like a range 2 shotgun with blast or something like that. But it's fine. I think most people are gonna run the 10.1. But the cheaper one, the cheaper one does give you a reliable sort of bottom end because of the 2 red dice. So I guess there's something to that.
Yeah, I think they could have even just made it, I mean, who knows with IP and stuff like that, how different they could have actually made these from each other. But I feel like they could have at least thrown some white dice onto one of these to give you a reason to take attack protocols, because
Yeah,
rerolling 4 dice is not going to be a thing that you have to do with either of these dice pools really ever.
no, probably not.
So I think you're taking engagement or defense protocols pretty much all the time on the crab droid, and that feels a little boring to me. If one of these two options was like 2 black dice and 3 white dice, and or 4 white dice, whatever, I think that would have been better and more interesting. But they're kind of samey. It's fine. I could see the case for either of them. It basically just comes down to whether you're concerned about armor or not.
Yeah, but you're right. Is that I think that there is like a pretty decent argument for just running them naked, and then you're just bum rushing points. I think that like the one downside I could think of with that is that if you're going to be like, yeah, you would probably just run engagement protocols on them because the super attack is going to fall behind. It's going to be way slower, and the super attack doesn't want to double move all the time. It wants to single move and strategize probably. So I think that that's sort of like the mega aggro version of that list, is that you're gonna, for a commander, you would maybe run, like you could maybe run Dooku as your commander, and then your whole list is just like a hard charging droid list. And so you're gonna give scouting to Dooku and then scouting to his 2 Magna Guards, and then you're just like going for it.
Yep, just get right in there basically.
Yep.
Have some B2s if you can afford it. B2s are awesome.
It sounds like a lot of fun, I gotta say. I'm excited to put those together and try them out.
It opens up some options for droids in a way that, like, I'm trying to think of recent releases we've had, and this is the first one I can think of that we've had recently that actually like opens up a tactical choice that the faction hasn't previously had. Like riot troopers obviously are just objectively terrible. And then, sorry, riot troopers.
They theoretically were going to open up a tactical choice.
Well, I think you could argue that since they downgraded Stormtrooper white dice, all the riot troopers were doing was kind of like replacing that previous native decent melee that you had on your core units. But
they do have charge though, and so it's not nothing.
Sure.
And so if they had a way to move reliably, which is one of their 2 biggest problems, their other biggest problem is just that they cost too much. Is that it's like, if they were cheaper and had Dauntless, is that then you're in a situation to where like it would have, I think, filled a hole that Empire had. And it's true that it was sort of artificially created by downgrading the melee dice on Stormtroopers. But right now is that they got, like, for non-unique charging melee units, is that they have dewbacks, which are great, and they have IRG, which are less great. And that's pretty much it as far as I know.
Yeah. So, but I mean, and Sleeper Cell was kind of, there's just a hyper efficient range 2 unit.
Yeah.
Which is great for Rebels, but it doesn't really like add another dimension to what they can do. And I feel like crab droids actually do that for separatists.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I'm excited as someone that's been kind of maining separatists recently. I was pretty sad about that PK droid cost increase, but I think I can be excited about these guys. Then we have Aqua Droids, which we still don't have any sort of unit card or any information about what they actually do. We do have the miniatures, which look really cool.
Yeah, they look great.
They're very big. They're basically, I mean, they're vehicle sized.
Mm-hmm.
And they're on notched bases, so that kind of reinforces. I think they've officially confirmed that these will be ground vehicles like Droidicas, right? I feel like I saw that on one of their streams.
I've seen people talk about that, so I would assume that that's true. I haven't like seen it to verify it. Is that um but yeah, like either they're like droidicas or they're notch troopers. Either way is that their silhouette would probably be about the same kind of regardless. It's like, the tall version. The vehicle thing would obviously matter in terms of making a big LOS wall. If you have 4 minis in the unit, like, that would be, and actually like this would be the first, it would be the first vehicle unit that's more than 2 minis, right?
Yes, and in fact, it appears to definitely be 4 because on the box it says basically includes miniatures for 1 heavy unit, and there's 4 miniatures in the box. And then, I mean,
There's one
certainly we
upgrade
can
card
discuss,
also,
and there's 1 upgrade card, and of
which
course we can kind of debate the reliability of these descriptions on the Asmodee site. But one of the bullets says 1 Aquadroid leader, 2 Aquadroid troopers, and 1 Aquadroid heavy. So that definitely sounds like, first of all, a vehicle heavy upgrade that adds a mini to a unit, I think is also not something we've seen before.
yeah.
So that'll be interesting. But it seems pretty clear that it's like a 4 miniature vehicle unit, which, yeah, I mean, you're gonna be able to make a four unit wide, 4 model wide wall these dudes pretty easily, I think. I mean, vehicles don't block each other's movement anymore, so it's not like,
Yeah, you don't have to be mega precise like they used to move them up, marching up in a line.
right.
And they also will get the free pivot before movement, which, yeah, like that'll be nice for them too. Yeah, and then I guess like they it seems like they're going for something that's similar to Dark Troopers.
Yeah.
And I never really sort of got the same vibe from those Mon Cala episodes that these things were supposed to be as like scary and unstoppable as the Dark Troopers that showed up in Mandalorian show, but they're big, so whatever. I'll believe anything.
Yeah, and in those Mon Cal episodes, they kind of just felt like swimming B2s.
Yeah,
Um,
basically. I
but
did not
obviously,
realize how tall they were.
I didn't either. And in fact, they kind of imply on the box description that they could potentially be kind of Dark Trooper like in their function.
Mm,
I don't want to go so far as to predict that they have the unstoppable keyword, but it does say when used in large groups, aqua droids are nearly impossible to stop, persistently advancing toward their target until it is eradicated. So
okay.
impossible to stop
Yeah.
is like doesn't quite say unstoppable, but um I don't know. I They seem to be going for a Dark Trooper vibe here, so
Yeah. So I could see them, if they had unstoppable, I could see them maybe having a speed 1 move, because otherwise, like if they were speed 2 with how big their base is, which is it's a medium base, right? Or
I think
is
it
it a
looks the same size as a Droideka to me.
okay.
Yeah.
Um but yeah, is that if they had unstoppable with speed 2 and that size base, then Lord help us, they would be ridiculously fast.
Yeah, they would be.
But yeah, I mean, it's cool. Like I definitely want to see the cards.
Yeah.
And they're also releasing 2 Aqua droids and then a Quarren and a Shark guy for shatter points. So they're really hitting hard on those, what, like 3 episodes in Mon Calamari from
Yeah.
Clone Wars. But it's they're gonna be fun to paint, I can tell. So I'm definitely excited for that. I'm glad that droid players are gonna be getting like some really cool new toys, because it feels like it's kind of been a while for them.
It has, yeah. I mean,
Like
have,
Asajj,
yeah, Asajj was the last like
new
actual
miniature.
new
Yeah,
miniature,
yeah,
obviously with experimental droids being so good at
right.
that Battle Force release was a real shot in the arm for Separatist players in general. And it made a lot of units good that like previously weren't really. But
Probably
yeah,
led to a lot of snail purchases also when 2.6 came out.
yeah,
People were like, I can put 2 ordinances on there. Okay.
yeah. And I can use Exemplar to trigger
Yeah.
the defense protocols. Yeah. So, but yes, I believe that it has been Asajj since they've gotten a physical new miniature, and Asajj was 2 years ago at this point.
It was close to 2 years ago. I think it was like the February right before Worlds, if I remember right, because Asajj was there in Worlds.
Yeah.
Well, that's good. I'm glad that droid players are getting what looks like definitely crab droids are a good buy. I think it's easy to say. And then this one, we got to see the card, but it's promising so far.
Yeah, agreed. All right, let's talk about your article. So tell us what you wrote about.
So I had an idea based on just like the chatter that I was hearing locally and then seeing on Discord and then, having just like some one-to-one chats with people about sort of the vibe that people have now that we're almost 4 months into Legion 2.6, like basically 3.5 months since it started to show up as like the mainstay for tournaments. But also, it took a week or two for casual play to really figure out what was going on after the release. So we've had some time now, and what I tried to cover with the article was the fact that I think that the 2.6 update has made a lot of positive changes, and I think that the game did need a shot in the arm. Like certainly from where the meta was towards the end of Legacy, is that I think you're going to find very few people who are going to be like, yeah, EXD taking slightly better range 5 shots at Republic and then sort of dominating everything. With the occasional like exciting list, like the one that actually won Worlds, that would sort of barge in there and do some funky stuff. But that generally after that, especially when Commandos came out, it was really starting to seem like, okay, it's now EXD versus Commandos, and who's going to be better at shooting you from really far away for like the entire game. And so a lot of players, like me included, were starting to feel like that was getting pretty stale. And so we were definitely ready for an update. And I think that there have been a lot of positive changes from Legion 2.6. I like the cover system. I like the fact that vehicles are always relevant for objectives. There's a bunch of other stuff. But something that I began to notice was that folks would talk about how the gameplay experience game to game of Legion 2.6 was starting to sort of be a little bit less variable, like between games than it had been in Legacy. Is that because of the nature of primary objectives, is that they all involve like getting onto multiple points starting with round 2, and that they have progressive scoring that remains the same round 2 and thereafter. Is that on top of like a bunch of other like things, both small and large, that were changes made to the game, is that it resulted in the fact that like A, list construction, and B, gameplay started to be sort of funneled towards a particular point for both of them. Is that the way that you put it when we were going over what was going to be in the article was that there used to be sort of 3 major archetypes of building lists in Legion. Is that, if you wanted to really simplify it, is that you had A, gun lines, B, aggro lists that were melee / range 2, and then C, objective skews. And now that there's one less round and that you have to get in there, is that what we're seeing is that there's this sort of fusion of gun lines and aggro lists, to where most of the successful lists out there are doing something that has a bit of both. Even the more skewed examples like Ewoks is that they do still have an ATST in the back that's shooting at guys. And even like the Wookiee list, even if you're doing it like without Yoda, is that you're going to have either Fluttercraft or the shooting Wookiees in the back line, doing some damage with their guns as the regular ones are charging in. And so you saw all of these changes made to like list making strategy and then strategy in the game, to where everybody is just kind of moving towards those points, and you're having a fight that usually starts in earnest on round 2, but very importantly is that if you design your list right, you can start that early on round 1 by getting some attrition in with fast movers with long range guns. You want both of those things because you want to get those shots in, but you also want to do it from relative safety so that you're not like vulnerable to return fire yet. So it's like move in pretty deep and then shoot round 1. Round 2, you're moving in and brawling, and then round 3, to me at least, it's often felt like round 3 is sort of, that's when the conclusion of the brawl becomes evident about who's going to come out on top. And then in my experience, I know this is not universal, but that like rounds 4 and 5 often feel like it's kind of clean up for whoever got ahead in round 3, both from an attrition perspective and a VP perspective. And that the number one complaint I was hearing, like, we'll just go ahead and say this, was that Gar was like ridiculously powerful and making things unfun. And so we should acknowledge that, and acknowledge the fact that I think AMG did a what seems like certainly moving in the right direction. It's possible that their changes weren't quite enough, like we're going to see. I want to take back what I said about Commandos last week, by the way, is that that was either just right or not quite enough, after having tried them out. Is that they're certainly far from a dead unit, is that they're still extremely good. But aside from that, is that the other big complaint I've been hearing is just the fact that the variety of gameplay seems to be somewhat missing in this new edition. The nature of primary objectives is just that you're piling in, and that the secondary objectives can introduce some pretty cool variability. Like I think that recon mission and surface scan are pretty neat, and that like they involve doing some like using units in a way that felt like it was brand new. And so I like that a lot. And I think I've heard other people say the same stuff too, but the fact is that those secondaries are just not worth as much as the primaries. And so as it stands right now, is that the lists and gameplay objectives are to build something that will either shoot first big or be able to sort of weather that shot very well. So, you know, the Ewoks and Vader Immortal aren't going to have major turn 1 plays, but they have so much redundancy with the medics and all the Ewoks everywhere, is that they can survive those turn 1 plays, and then they can start brawling really well. So you either needed to really survive or really, really shoot, and then get in there and brawl. And there's only so many ways to do that. Nobody's placing evaporators and realizing that they really messed up, and then ending up in sort of an unfair fight, like close to the last evaporator towards the end of the game. Nobody is sort of doing a standoff in front of the central box or the key position. I think that KP was like a little bit more boring than recover the supplies, but none of that sort of that guesswork of how are you going to go about completing this is there. I feel like a lot of the feeling of a chess game is gone, and so, you know, I'll kind of stop for a second by saying that I mentioned in the article is that I am a fan of just like kind of getting in there and brawling, and that's like the thing that I feel like I'm good at as far as Legion skills go. So from that perspective, I've not minded 2.6, but I have a lot of buds that they played the dodgy rebel lists, or they played lists that relied on using the old transport rules, and I feel like they're left kind of wanting in terms of the variety of gameplay experience, because the current nature of primary objectives is just that they aren't super different from each other. And that means that a lot of games, I don't want to be reductive and say that games all feel the same, because like I really don't like that kind of hyperbole, because it's not true anyway, but they feel closer to each other. And that's sort of the sum total of what the article is about.
Yeah, and that's been kind of my experience too, and I think that's been reflected in a lot of other people's experience. It's just that, like, I don't want to say that they all feel the same either, because that's not entirely accurate. But the word that I think the most suits at least my personal experience with 2.6 is that it feels kind of scripted.
Mm-hmm.
Where, like you said, turn one is you're either hiding or you're trading long range shots. Turn two, you're piling in. Turn three, you're kind of closing out whatever fight resulted from that pile in. And then turn four and five, whoever won is cleaning up.
Yeah.
And that's kind of just how it goes. And because you're forced to just like basically headbutt your opponent as early as possible, it feels like you just don't have a lot of options with how to approach the puzzle. Um, and I've always enjoyed the fight as well, but I've probably enjoyed a more nuanced version of the fight, maybe
Yeah,
than
totally.
you.
I'll admit
Uh,
that. Yeah.
and one that involves kind of like, working side angles and flanking and using things like speeders and stuff like that, and also just kind of using the different variety and objectives to approach problems from different angles. And I think one of the things, and we'll get one of the one of the comments I saw in just the feedback to your article, and I want to set up this discussion this way too, is that you're offering a lot of like criticisms without offering solutions. I think there are good reasons for that in the article, which I'll let you get to in your own words. But we will sort of on the cast kind of throw out some ideas for possible solutions.
Yeah.
But one of the things I miss about Legacy Legion is just the variety of experience that comes with having a, 8 objectives that are all very different from each other. And, clearly some of those were boring and needed rework. Key positions, I feel like, kind of becomes the poster boy for like, the entirety
And
of Legacy Legion is judged based on key positions, and
and also
they're
late stage evaporators also, and even late
once
stage
ties were a
hostage.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah. Once ties were possible, it definitely made a lot of objectives, particularly evaporators and hostage, that were previously like very dynamic,
Yes. Yes.
much more boring, frankly. But that was also kind of a self-created problem. Uh, but anyway, um, I guess my point is like one of the things besides just having 8 objectives that were all different from each other is you also had 8 deployments that were all different from each other,
Right.
and you could use those two in combination with each other to get up to 64 different combinations. And VAPS plays very different on Hemmed In than it does on Long March
Danger close.
or
Yeah.
Danger Close, right?
Yeah.
And the same is true of the other objectives too. Each of those plays very differently depending on what deployment you get, and then of course you've got that third condition thing too, which would not affect how you approached a game as much as the first two. But there was a lot of like, okay, suppose you get this combination, here's how you can approach that, depending on what your list is, and if you instead get this combination, here's how you can approach that. And I kind of miss that. I feel like, and I feel like there are ways to add that back into the game, which we'll get to, without just being like, well, let's just rewind and go back to the old objectives. That's clearly not on the table, and that's not what I'm advocating for.
Yeah. Me neither.
Um,
But yeah.
but yeah. So I think there are ways to do that. But yeah, it feels a little bit too scripted to me, and that makes playing lots and lots of games of it not as appealing.
Yeah, I think even though it was an example of when balance was objectively a problem with the game, is that you and I both played the original form of Blizzard Force at LVO a
Yep.
couple years ago, and obviously a big part of that was the fact that it was very, very strong. Like at the time, it was just the strongest list.
Right.
But one of the big bonuses about Blizzard Force, and this was true even like all the way up until the end of Legacy, even if it was a little bit less good than it had been before, was the fact that you had a hard hitting army that also had a Jedi in it, that also had a Sith in it, that also had 4 fast movers in the form of speeder bikes that would give you a variety of gameplay options with them, depending on the objective that you drew. And so, and like flying those speeders around well, it did take like some thought, is that if you just kind of sort of dove with them willy-nilly, is that you were going to lose because your attack wouldn't be coordinated, and you were just like speeder bikes would die before your other troops are getting in there. So there was something to it. And then like very often you would just kind of fly around with the speeders and go around the side so that you could get those flanks, and then that way you could like hit their back lines with the speeder that are coming out from a building on the side. And so even if it was something like intercept, to where the speeders were never going to score anything, is that they had a job to do. They were still going to get heavy cover back then, so that they wouldn't die immediately to return fire. They would just die almost immediately to return fire. And that's
an important difference.
It is. It is a very, like, it may make an entire round of shooting difference, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, again, early on balance was an issue, but like what Blizzard Force became when they switched it to Commander Vader is that it still remained a very viable list, and it remained a very fun list, because you had all those options, and that you would run an objective deck that felt like very powerful, which is also why it continued to try to bid back in the day, because it often felt like you were really like going towards an array of victory conditions, from like pure objective stuff like sneak around the back and drop bombs off, but also just like kind of charge in and hit them if you needed to. And now it's really on the latter, right? Is that you're building the list to charge those POIs, and because the sort of being sneaky, going around the back, most speeders aren't gonna like live long enough to really like get in there and help these days anyway. But B, there's not a ton of incentive, because there's a couple objectives, like destroy enemy base is another example of one, to where running those like really fast units that could threaten to just like dive the enemy base when your opponent is maybe like slacking off their defenses of it a little bit. So like that is cool, but that's still only worth 4 points compared to the at least 8 points that you would need to get from the primary objectives in a game like that. And so building, like, there's no such thing as an objective skew list anymore. The closest thing is a list that has 3 fast movers that are good enough at fighting and are also like so fast that they are able to dive objectives when they really need to. And in my experience, that's literally just the Fluttercraft Attack Craft, because it's large base and speed 3. And it has the natural heavy cover, and its dice don't degrade. And so like it has all those things going for it. Whereas every other speeder in the game is, front arc, less health, less fast. And so it just doesn't work. And I feel like that style of gameplay should be open to everybody instead of just the Wookiee Defenders Battle Force. So
yeah, certainly as somebody who owns 4 Imperial speeder bikes and really loved using them back in their heyday, I fully agree. That was some of the most fun that I had in Legion, even after it got nerfed.
Yeah.
Just from the play style, it was really it was a very fragile list even back then.
Yeah.
But it was one where it was just very dynamic. You could use the entire map. You had Vader, who was very much a finesse piece. Even though he's a blender, he's still, this seems a lot less true than it used to be, but all Force users are finesse pieces. Um, and Vader certainly was and still is no exception.
He didn't have to deflect on all the time back then.
He did not. And you could do a lot more things with the various force powers and on the various objectives besides just like murdering things that were relevant. So, not that, I mean, Vader's great at murdering things, obviously, but yeah. So let's talk about some possible ideas for maybe improving this. As you kind of noted in some of your response to this commentary, obviously we are not developers. We are players, which is why I think you focused in your article on, highlighting some of the things that could be improved without recommending specific improvements. But this is a little bit less formal of a setting, just you and me talking here. So I think we can probably throw some ideas out there and maybe borrow from some other systems as well for some of these ideas. And just to be clear, what we're not advocating for is like any sort of like, let's just go back to Legacy Legion. I know sometimes I'll speak only for myself here. The the reminiscing, so to speak, about the Legacy Legion days maybe can feel like, hey, why don't we just revert everything and play that again? I'm not advocating for that.
I'm certainly not either, and I think that it's understandable about why people may sort of see what I talk about in the article and sort of take that as me saying, well, they just messed everything up and it was better in the good old days. Is that I think that certain things were better. I think that, again, like I'm personally having more fun with this version of Legion. The biggest reason why I wrote the article was that I was running into a lot of people who did feel like they were having less fun because of the variety problems. But I do think it's very solvable. And so yeah, like neither of us are saying that is that we're not looking at Legacy Legion through completely rose tinted glasses. I think we're human beings, so the glasses are going to be like a little bit rosy to a certain extent because like we both liked a lot of aspects of Legacy Legion, but I certainly also disliked a lot of aspects of Legacy Legion that I think were very much improved upon. But I feel like we can always aim higher, and I do think that there's a potential future state where the players who wanted more interaction are gonna like remain happy, but the players who wanted to have more gameplay variety can also be a little bit happier. And so, for my part, I was gonna talk about. I did this a little bit in the article, but I was gonna talk about Atomic Mass's original game, Marvel Crisis Protocol. So MCP is a couple of years younger than Legion, not by much, but it's been around a while. Like I remember I first saw it at Nova back when I was playing X-Wing there, which would have been like a really long time ago, 2018 or something like that.
I think it's about a year younger than Legion.
Yeah. So and over time, as with any game, is that MCP has had some ups and downs in terms of sort of like the general feeling of balance. That there have been like multiple sort of sections of time to where certain lists or certain characters were just sort of just like bullying everybody. But AMG has done a thorough, like a really impressively thorough job at at making corrections. They did release like new physical cards for stuff they updated 2 years ago, and they are probably going to do something similar probably like mid next year is my guess. They haven't like revealed that per se, but they've definitely made like print and play adjustments as they needed to for a balance. And some of the things that they have actually dealt with are like obscenely powerful turn one plays. Like there's a character named Angela who would basically be able to just like dive out there and get objectives with the very first activation in it to a degree that it felt completely unfair. And then she could just run away home because she was like a large base with a long move. And so they dealt with that. And then there's like various other characters that presented like these, they were sort of breaking the game to the point that it was becoming MPE, and you know it would take a couple of months usually, but they would deal with it. And they also sort of they didn't completely change their objectives a couple of years ago, but I'd say that they sort of 50% changed their objectives. Is that there were a couple completely new ones and a couple to where they just modified the rules to make them feel more equal to each other and to sort of make a couple of them less abusable. And now the game has something like 185 characters in it. I don't know exactly, but it's a lot. There's almost 30 affiliations, and you can do in MCP, you can do some mix and match. So if you're going to play X-Men, as long as the majority, which is greater than 50% of your list, is X-Men, then the rest can be whatever. So you can have like 3 X-Men and Thanos if you really want to. But like, and so like when you think about that, that's the way the game is structured, is that they have to account for a lot in terms of the ways that certain characters may potentially be able to abuse certain faction abilities, and like these tactics cards that also vary between factions. But you actually run into those sort of like game breaking rules things way less often than you would assume when you have that many variables. And so that game to me is proof of the fact that, you know, when AMG has some time to sort of really mold the product into what they want it to be, is that like they really can achieve something. I think MCP, in a way you can say that even though Legion is slightly older, is that MCP is the most mature game that they have because they were the devs that whole time. And so Legion, because it switched holders like almost halfway through its life cycle, is that there were going to be some natural aspects of immaturity, and then the pandemic like obviously didn't help with that either. And so there's all these variables that haven't helped them. But aside from their balance stuff, is that I did want to specifically mention that from an objective card standpoint, is that fans of sort of like the turn zero aspect of Legion may bristle at this a little bit, but like in MCP is that it is completely, everybody chooses their own cards, but then what happens with the cards is completely random, but it is also completely fair, which is to say that in MCP, they have something sort of similar to primaries and secondaries, but in MCP, it's secures and extracts. So secures are POIs, and then extracts are basically recover the supplies. But on the article, I showed a couple of examples of different secures, is that even though they're all points that you huddle around, is that they're all like really different from each other, is that they're arrayed across the map in sometimes wildly different ways. So there's some to where it's like all 4 corners of the map, which means that you would want teams that are a little bit wider to be able to handle that objective, so that you can sort of zoom around and take care of business. And there's some that's like right down the middle in this like shortened eye, which means that you would want to probably field a team that's a little bit more brawly for that one. And if there's fewer objectives, they're worth more. So there's one where there's only 2 objectives on the field, but they're each worth 2 when they're usually only worth 1 like per turn. So then that's the secures, but then there's also the extracts, to where you're grabbing stuff, but sometimes they'll give you like extra abilities. Sometimes they'll actively hurt you by grabbing them. And so there's all these different variables that come into play, and that also comes into play when you're like picking your team for that round. And so a way that I think Legion could potentially learn from that is that it could make it so that basically one side is always bringing their primaries and then the other side is always going to be bringing their secondaries. And it would be random, but still like the cards that you take is not random. And so you would want to field an army that can sort of like deal with either of them, but also be flexible enough to deal with your opponents to a certain extent. It wouldn't sort of fix the skew issue that we have now, and it does make turn 0 less interactive because it is completely random. But for what it's worth, the current state is that right now you actually want to lose the roll off so that you can have the so that you can be red player and be responsible for doing the last replacement, because then you can guarantee that your primary is on there, or you can guarantee your secondary is on there. Or if you have the information that you already like both of them, then you can dig for advanced intel, which is the only advantage that actually matters in this game right now.
Yep.
And so I think that they got part of the way there by having two sets of objectives, but the problem as I see it now is just that the primaries are the ones that matter the most, and that they're not that different from each other. Like shifting priorities is the primary that is most unlike the rest, just because of the nature of the fact that they move around. But you think about like, it's true that Recover the Research has 6 and Close the Pocket has 3, but that's sort of the only difference between them. And you think of like there could be all these other possibilities, like taking damage from securing a POI, or taking poison tokens, or like potentially getting boost to one of your attack dice, or like a free mods for your attack dice the next round. There's all sorts of stuff that they could do, and they could take a lesson from MCP, because when you think about all of those extra things that happen with the objectives and the variety of layouts, is that when you double that, because it's different for both secures and extracts, is that it makes every game feel pretty different from each other. And I think that's exactly the sort of thing that Legion kind of needs right now.
Yeah, I think there's two things there that I want to build on. The first is, I think that if they really want, and I think they should, try and add some more variety to the objectives, both the secondaries and the primaries, but especially the primaries. I think they'll need to somehow address the turn 0 process, that you can basically lose the roll off and then force an objective.
Yeah.
One of the most popular changes, I think possibly the most popular change in the history of Legion, was when they moved from flipping 3 face up cards to 4.
Yeah.
Because it made it so that one player could not force a specific objective card.
Yeah.
And that was a massively important change, because it meant that, like, even if you were the player that was not bringing the battle cards, there was no situation where the player that was bringing the battle cards could actually force one specific card on you. And that was a universally positive regarded change. And I think now the problem, like, we're back into a situation where you have basically a random element that determines if one player can force one of their cards on their opponent. And I think there are a lot of potential fixes for that. I find it hard to like justify making the argument that like a bunch of very different objectives that you could potentially skew for would be positive unless you can fix that. There are some possible solutions I've seen floated are make it so that like basically the cards you're about to draw is face up, which would also remove the possibility that you could like redraw the same card that you were trying to get rid of.
Yeah.
There are definitely some situations where they could not go straight back to the veto process with the panel and still make it so that one player can't force one specific objective card. You could shuffle everybody's decks together, so that you don't know whether you're forcing your card or your opponent's card. You're just trying to change what's out there already. Like, you don't like the card that's face up, right? But you don't know when you flip it over whose card you're going to get. There's some things like that, and I think that's kind of a prerequisite for adding more objective variety. Otherwise, you'll just get a situation where you just kind of randomly get screwed.
Yeah.
Um, so that would be step one. The second, and I think they can kind of still work within the framework of having POIs and having primaries be samey here, is to add. Sorry, one second. And we're back. Anyway, yeah. So one other game that I've been side piecing lately, if you will,
Yeah.
because it's got such a low barrier to entry, is Kill Team, and I think they could borrow some flavor from that. And that Kill Team is another game where they call it I think the critical op, but and I could be getting my names mixed up here, but basically the thing that involves like area control, they basically have a similar situation where you have fixed spots on the map that you have to get your units around to control, and like the how kind of varies, but similar to Legion, they're always in the same spot and they always involve getting units to those spots.
Yeah.
So that's very similar, but there's two other ways to score actual victory points that are worth the same amount as that. And one of them is just straight up killing units. So in Kill Team, killing models earns you like actual straight up victory points instead of just becoming a tiebreak. I don't know if Legion would benefit from going quite that far, but they certainly could have sort of like a stock tertiary objective that gives you actually victory points for killing stuff. I know that's kind of dangerous territory, and that becomes potentially more snowbally since the game is already very much about killing stuff. But
Well, we already got marked targets, and the other one, the shoot them all over the world. I forget what that one's called, but the one where you have to like shoot them from various places, or get
yeah,
destroy
yeah,
units from various places.
yeah,
They like that's the funny thing though, is that they have those, but you get that instead of the secondaries that I think are more interesting, like
right.
surface scan and destroy enemy base and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then Kill Team also has secondaries. They call it, I think, the tactical op,
Mm-hmm.
which is essentially they're actually secret objectives. So you have your kill team that you select has, they call them archetypes, but basically there's like two categories of tactical objectives that you can pick, and then you just pick one before each battle, and you don't reveal it to your opponent until you score it. But your choices are restricted based on which team you're running. So, uh, and then those each of those three things are worth potentially like roughly the same amount of victory points, and then you also secretly pick one of those three categories to for you be worth more than the other three, and you basically add 50% of however many victory points you scored in that category to your final score at the end of the game. And your opponent, of course, doesn't know which of those three that you're going for. So it adds like another dimension to how you can potentially score. And I think that could potentially resolve the problem of where it feels like you just can't. I'm not saying just straight up copy Kill Team, but just introducing more ways to score and making it so that those ways are worth similar victory points to the primary objectives, I think can create more situations where you can come from behind. Because one of the things, another criticism that I've experienced myself and I've heard a lot of people saying about 2.6 is that there's really like no way, or it's very difficult to come from behind if you get behind early.
Yeah.
Since the primary matters a lot more than the secondary, and every round of the primary is scored the same. If you get behind on turns 2 and 3, there's basically no way to just like swarm in there on 4 and 5 and catch up, especially because they also have that first to 12 kind of slaughter rule situation where if your opponent gets to 12 before you, you just basically automatically lose. um so I think they could increase that number, or just remove that and make it so that you stop at 5. Um, I think that they could introduce more ways to score and make those ways worth more relative to the primary objective. I also think one thing that would be really simple that would help would be to make the progressive scoring actually progressive, in that the later rounds are worth more than
Mm.
the earlier rounds, kind of like old Intercept.
Right.
Um, So
that would reduce the big incentive to have a list that can really get in there and start brawling. And yeah, I think that would sort of relieve the tension of like if you decided to run a list to where you had uh triple rebel veterans and triple Mark IIs, which creates this situation to where you either need to forward deploy to the point where you're living very dangerously because you're a bunch of speed one movers, but you need to like contest those POIs, or you need to like be a little bit safer, but then realize that you're going to be spending some turns double moving in order to get in there. Is that if the scoring was truly progressive to the point where, because like with old intercept, is that there were some games to where the best strategy was to actually like let your opponent take the middle, but you take more attack actions than they do, and so you sort of wear them down. And you can even do that for like most of the game, as long as because as long as you were going to get 2 of those points in turn 6, then you would actually be able to tie the VPs, even if your opponent had scored 2 points in rounds 2 and 4, because as long as you were getting the kills, is that you're still going to come out ahead. And so that was truly a viable strategy. And clones actually kind of like to do that a lot, because they would sort of hang back at range 3 and let the opponent move in there and just like shoot them all. But yeah, like, so if it was truly progressive, then that would take some of the pressure off early, because some of these armies, like, they're just not built to be able to be in there fighting on turn 2. And I think that that's where a lot of them can fall on their face, is that if a player is feeling rushed to do that, is that they end up just like double moving, for instance, speed 1 units like shore troopers or rebel veterans, and then you're contesting once, but then you've put yourself in a bad position, and then those guys are all going to die, and then by round 3 you're like not going to have an army left. So yeah, I think that could work. I like the secret objective thing. We could just like straight up replace advantages with that, as far as I'm concerned, because the whole advantage thing has not been a great start, where there's only 1 out of 6 that really matters, and so everybody's just digging for that. Like sometimes it's fun, like with the ordnance and strafing run, and I've had ordnance matter once. Strafing run I have not had matter yet, but and then the other ones, it's almost like nothing's happening. So yeah, I know that they're not going to do that. They're not going to like they're going to be printing this stuff soon, and so like having a secret third objective, that may be something for like the far future. But for now, I feel like what they could do in a much faster order would be to at least like inject some more variety into the primaries, and potentially have the secondaries like worth, if not as much, like almost as much. Maybe a little bit more variety in them too. Like if they're going to release more secondaries, like let's stop with the ones that are just like kind of kill your opponent's guys, and do some more stuff like surface scan, recon mission, and destroy enemy base, because like those are the cool ones, and then the other ones are just kind of whatever. I know Empire players like bring them to heal, and it must feel nice to just like play Krennic's 3 pip and just like sort of win that one. But the other factions can't even do it.
Doesn't playing Krennic's 3 pip on Bring Them to Heal effectively score you both the same?
I guess it does. I guess it does score you both, right?
Yeah.
So, but yeah, so that's a good point. But they also have access to the most suppressive guns, also.
Yeah.
So it definitely feels best for Empire. And there's also Vader's 3 pip that can also like do a lot of work as far as that one goes.
Oh yeah, for sure. Master of Evil on that is
it's good.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, just more ways to score.
Yeah,
more ways to score that are worth more. I think those are 2 things that they could do just within the existing framework that wouldn't be reinventing the wheel so quickly after doing that already. That would help a lot towards that progressive, making it so that you can actually come back. And I think making those comeback type situations possible also creates more of those moments that I feel like have been missing for me from Legion 260, where it's like, man, this game really hinged on this one thing happening or this one thing not happening. And there was this awesome moment at the end of the game where,
Right.
like, I was losing and then Vader or Luke or somebody did this one really cool thing. And then suddenly I was winning instead. And um, yeah, I haven't had a lot of those. I don't want to say I've had none because there have been a couple, but generally speaking, I feel like those were like the norm for me, and now they seem much more rare. And I think making it so that comeback wins were more possible, which you do by introducing more ways to score and more ways to score late
Yeah.
specifically, I think it makes the game more fun and more dynamic and makes more memorable moments.
Totally
Besides
agree.
just, we all piled in on turn two and we rolled some dice and then I had more stuff left
Yeah.
and that was it.
But yeah,
So,
I killed 3 units and he killed one of mine. And then the next turn, I killed 3 more of his and he killed one more of mine. And then the game was over.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, but it feels like it happens that way a lot. And yeah, like nobody is ever, I don't think anybody's ever winning Legion 2.6 with like one, uh, you know, almost like with one commando strike team that has 3 suppression tokens on it that's like desperately holding on to a hostage token and surviving, like rolling all blocks in the last shot to win the game. Like that stuff, it wasn't all the time, but it did happen. And so like I feel like especially with rebel players where they had sort of all the neat tricks with characters like Jin or Han or whatever, is that those gameplay options just like don't feel like they're there anymore. And I don't, again, yeah, we don't want to go like back to Legacy Legion, but I think that there's some stuff that they can port over without having to like start all over again, because we certainly aren't asking for or suggesting that anybody do that.
Yep. All right. Well, any final thoughts?
I'll just very quickly say that one of the other parts of that article was about the steady, relentless charge thing, and I'll just
Yeah.
say that RIP Rebellious, which I think that
Yeah.
like is kind of it's like sort of darkly funny that poor Jin is that pretty much the entire meaning for one pip got taken away with that chain. So if there's anything to where I'd ask Atomic Mass to consider going back to the old days, it might be that. But I guess we will see what happens. Like for all we know is that there's going to be a whole bunch of drops in April that make us understand exactly why they did that. But even if that's the case, is that what's going to happen to poor Yoda?
Yeah, poor Yoda. He got 10 points cheaper, Evan. It's all good. Everything's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, where's my Palpatine cut?
Yeah, you may still get it. It's they're going to make him speed 2. They're going to give him Scout 3, which is canon for if you've ever played Star Wars Battlefront.
Yeah, right.
Because like he does leap around there,
just flies
like
around.
a crazy wizard man.
Yep.
Yeah, but you could say you start in the game with like that twirly forward jump that he does in episode 3. Yeah, that's a Scout 3 move.
Yeah, in Battlefront 2, he literally like flies around the battlefield.
It's
like, a little bit silly.
Sometimes my wife would walk by while I was playing that game and I was playing as Emperor Palpatine and like literally hopping around like a bunny on the battlefield, like just jumping 10 feet in the air and force jumping. And she was like, I don't remember this from the movies. It's like, I don't either, but it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, right. Yeah, speed 2, that'd be fine. And then I don't know. I'm super sad in that like I really liked using him with Vader and doing pull the strings on Vader, or IRG, But hey, IRG could use rework too. They're pretty garbage.
they're gonna get one.
I hope so.
If anything is fair out there, they're gonna get one, and I feel like Jin has to get one by now. And I hope that everybody who's like sort of mournfully looking at their old unit cards and hoping for cool stuff in the next one will get what they want, and that they don't experience what happened to Padme. That's really my hope for everybody else.
Poor Padme. Yeah, I like how you included her in your article as a unit that has a deployment keyword, but barely listed.
Yeah, I made the text as tiny as possible while still being legible.
Yep. All right. Well, we are the Notorious Scoundrels. I'm Kyle.
I'm Evan.
Stay fresh, cheese bags.